Thank you, singers of songs and teachers of children. Make our church rock. So, what are we doing? Yes, for the past 2 weeks we've been having a wee look at the Gospel, the Christmas story, I should say, according to St. Matthew. We call him St. Matthew, but in reality he wasn't all that much of a saint all the time. He was just like you. He was a person who made some bad decisions and who hurt an awful lot of people. And then later in life he had this experience with Jesus, this spiritual thing happened, and he changed. And later in life, much later in life, he found himself doing the sort of job that I do now. And then as the first century wore on, and as the church expanded beyond its original group, this person that we today call St. Matthew found himself talking to people who'd never seen Jesus with their own eyes, who'd never heard his teachings with their own ears. And so for the benefit of those people, he wrote the story down. Here he is working on his biography of Jesus. And I like this painting because it's all wrong. And I think I like wrong things because they often teach us about what actually happened. So in this painting, notice there's an angel and he's talking to Matthew in a very saintly way, telling him what to write in the gospel. And it all sounds very saintly and very spiritual. In reality, he would have gone about his biography of Jesus in exactly the same way that any person doing a biography would. And as a biographer, this person Matthew is a historian's dream because he's writing in the first century. He's writing within living memory of the events that he describes. Matthew has first-hand knowledge. He's one of Jesus' best friends. He knows Jesus' family well. He was friends with Jesus' brothers. He knew Jesus' mother. He was as well placed to write a biography of Jesus as Paul McCartney would be to write a biography of John Lennon. He knew him, he knew the right people, he had access to the right stories, including those which pertained to his birth. So what we're going to do this morning is we're going to have a little look at the best known part of Matthew's birth of Jesus story. So we're in Matthew chapter 1 and verse 18, which says that this is how the birth of Jesus Christ came about. His mother Mary was pledged to be married to Joseph. Now, at this point in the story, Mary's probably a young girl. I'm going to say about 14 years old. And Joseph is a young man, probably about 18 years old, who worked in construction. And Matthew says very carefully that these two are pledged to be married to one another. So they don't necessarily fancy each other. They don't necessarily like each other. They probably don't even know each other all that well, but none of that matters because in their culture they're pledged. You see, in first century Palestine, a young person didn't typically choose for themselves whom they would date and whom they would marry. That choice was usually made for them by their parents. Marriages in the ancient world are normally arranged marriages. And this arranging was done in 3 distinct stages. Stage 1. When a girl was about 7 years old, her parents would get together with the parents of a slightly older boy, and they would come to an arrangement that when their respective children were old enough, they'd get married. The reason the boy had to be a little bit older was so that he could spend 4 or 5 years working and making money for the marriage, making money to have a nice home and so on before the actual marriage date. So when Mary's just a little girl, playing with her Barbie dolls, completely uninterested in boys, her parents would have done a deal with Joseph's parents, and they would have agreed that when their children reached the appropriate age, Joseph would be Mary's husband. So, obviously, in that kind of culture, you really had to trust your parents, because they were the ones who were choosing your life partner for you. And for parents, this was a huge pressure. I did some Christmas shopping the other night for my kids, and I found that quite pressured. To get the right thing, would they like it or not? Imagine the pressure of having to choose a husband or wife for your special little child. In our culture, and I know some of you have experienced this, when our adult children get divorced, that's a lot to deal with. But how much harder would it be to deal with that if you lived in a culture where the reason for that divorce was because you as a parent had chosen the wrong life partner for your child? It would be your fault. That's how it would feel, at least. So consequently, in first century Palestine, the business of choosing a future husband or wife for your child was a serious business. Because if your child went on to have a happy, prosperous, flourishing marriage, that brought respect and honour to you as a parent within the community. It was a verification of your wisdom. Conversely, if your adult child had a miserable marriage, a failed marriage, a marriage that was difficult, that brought dishonour and disrespect to you as a parent within the community. It was a verification of your lack of wisdom. And that's just the way it was in those days. So this is stage one. It's very important. It was a very pressured experience for parents. You had to get it right. You had to choose the right partner for your child. Then stage two, about 7 years later, once the girl is safely out of puberty, she gets formally betrothed, this is the word, to the boy whom her parents have chosen for her. Now, being betrothed or pledged in first century Palestine was a little bit more intense than it is in 21st century Toronto. So there was a betrothal ceremony, and it was a bit more, well, it was like a wedding ceremony in many respects. There were certain words that were spoken, there was a betrothal dance, there was a betrothal meal, there were long boring speeches from uncles that nobody cared about, slideshows from friends, you know, the drill. Now, this is important. A betrothed couple entered into a legally binding relationship that was exactly the same as a marriage in but two regards. A betrothed couple didn't live together in the same house, and a betrothed couple didn't sleep together in the same bed. In all other regards, their relationship was an actual marriage. Consequently, if you wanted to get unbetrothed, you had to get a divorce. If your betrothed died, then you became a widow. It wasn't like today. If you want to break off an engagement, you just send a text, right? It's easy today. Shouldn't say that. Anyway, right, so this is Mary and Joseph's situation. They are, in verse 18, they're pledged, they're betrothed, they're in a legally binding relationship that you can only extricate yourself from with a divorce or murder, right? Then stage three, about a year after the betrothal ceremony, came the actual wedding ceremony, which was quite simple. Late at night, the husband would come in procession to his parents-in-law's home, and there would be torches and music and all that playing, and he would take his bride from her childhood home to the home that he has been working hard paying for the last 5 years, and then they lived together as husband and wife. Then they slept together in the same bed and did all the things that married couples do. Now, so far so good. Good story. In verse 18, what you've got here is a young couple doing the right thing within their ancient culture. They're obeying their parents as they were expected to do. They're in relationship with the person that their parents had chosen for them, and they're betrothed. But like all good stories, there's a problem. Don't mind me saying that. One of the things that makes your story so interesting is that there's problems. Similarly with the Christmas story, there's a problem. In verse 18, Matthew says that before they came together, that is, before stage three, before they lived together in the same house, before they were culturally permitted to sleep together in the same bed. Before all that, Mary was found to be with child through the Holy Spirit. Now, we read that, and we can't help but read it as people who are conditioned by our big C Catholic environment. We read it as people who are influenced by 2,000 years of Christian culture and teaching. And so when we read this sentence about her being with child through the Holy Spirit, we immediately associate it with the Immaculate Conception, and we're okay with it. We understand, we get it, it's part of the story. But Joseph wasn't okay with it. Joseph wasn't a big C Catholic. He didn't have the benefit of 2,000 years of Christian teaching and influence. And so when he finds out that his fiancée Mary is pregnant, he would have felt exactly the same way that you felt when you found out that your partner was cheating on you. And as soon as he finds out this information, there's immediately a very difficult conversation that takes place. And it wouldn't have been a saintly conversation. It would have been a conversation with lots of sweary words in it, right? Like, Mary, really, you've been cheating on me. You're pregnant. I've spent the last 5 years working in construction, building a home for you and for our marriage, and this, you're pregnant? Are you kidding me? And then Mary responds classically and explains it and says, yes, it's true, I am pregnant, but I wasn't cheating on you because God did it. Okay. Nice. So now what is poor Joseph thinking? Joseph is thinking, well, not only does he have to deal with the fact that his wife has been cheating on him, he also has to deal with the fact that his wife-to-be is mental. That's the only word for that, right? That's your story. You're pregnant and God did it. Nice. Nice. Okay. And here's why this is difficult for him. Joseph lives in a small village in an Oriental culture. A culture driven by face. Do you know what I mean by face? By the principles of respect. And in those small villages, in those cultures, the worst thing that could happen to anyone was for them to lose face, to lose respect within their community. And so in those cultures, the practice was that if your wife or your betrothed behaved inappropriately, that made you look bad as a man. If your wife was a cheat or your wife was mental, that made you lose face in your community. And the only way that you could regain respect and regain face within your community was by getting rid of your wife. I shouldn't say getting rid, because that's misinterpreted in our culture. Divorcing your wife. Therefore, verse 19 comes as no surprise. Matthew says that Joseph had in mind to divorce her. Joseph, remember, lives in a small village. And in Joseph's first century village, life revolves around family and Torah. At the center of Joseph's village, there would have been a synagogue. And Sabbath after Sabbath, families would gather together to hear the rules and the cultures and the assumptions of the Jewish faith reinforced in the synagogue. And in that small village, the societal pressure to live according to those rules would have been intense and unquestioned. And when word gets out, as it eventually will, that Mary's pregnant, news is going to spread like wildfire in this village. And upon hearing that news, everyone in the village, everyone in the synagogue, all of their friends, all of their customers, all of their employees are going to assume one of two things. Either they're going to assume that Joseph himself has gotten this girl pregnant. This is going to bring disrespect and dishonor to him as a man and to his parents. This is going to cause the sort of shame in his family that's going to mean they can't show their face in the synagogue. It's going to affect everything in their life. Loss of face, loss of respect, loss of business. Their world has collapsed. Or they're going to assume that Mary has cheated on Joseph. And Joseph, in not doing anything about it, as a real man would, as a real man should, is going to bring loss of face and loss of respect both to him and to his parents. Either way, their life as a family is over in this small village, and the only way they can they can get out of this loss of face and respect is by divorcing this pregnant, clearly mentally unstable young girl. So no news at all. The text says the first thing Joseph thinks about is to divorce her, but notice also that the text says that Joseph has in mind to divorce her quietly. And Matthew says that the reason he wants to do this quietly is because he was righteous. The word righteous is the Bible's way of saying Joseph was essentially a good man, a proper man. And it says quietly, not quietly as in so that no one will find out about it. That would have been impossible. But rather quietly as in not through the courts. When a couple get divorced, what's the one issue, the big issue, that normally dominates that battle? What's the one thing that it really all comes down to at the end of the day? Money, right. When Matthew says that Joseph wanted to divorce this girl quietly, he means quietly as in he's not that interested in money. Let me explain why not. When a couple got betrothed in the ancient world, there were two separate financial transactions that took place. The first transaction was that the groom had to pay a large sum of money to the parents of the bride. This was called the mohar, and it was a huge sum of money. A young man would have to save for years and years to afford the mohar. And the thinking behind the mohar was that it compensated a father for the loss of his daughter. And as I say, it was substantial. The second transaction that took place was a father would give a large sum of money to his daughter. And that money wasn't part of the pot that a couple had to build a new home or a life. It was like a financial insurance policy. So as a couple got betrothed, the father would say, look, darling, here's $100,000. That's not for a car. It's not a down payment on a home. It's for you to keep for a rainy day in case something happens. In case your husband gets sick and can't work, in case he dies. You never know. Something's going to happen, and this is for you to keep for a rainy day. So at the start of a marriage, there were these two big financial transactions. A sum of money that went from the groom to the father of the bride. And a separate sum of money that went from the father of the bride to the daughter. Okay? Now, in the first century, a husband who has lost face in the way that Joseph has lost face, a husband who's been embarrassed in his community in the way that Joseph has been embarrassed in his community, was legally entitled through the courts to get a 100% refund on the money he gave to the father of the bride. And fair enough, he bought faulty goods, right? That's an offensive thing to say in our culture, but that was the thinking. I paid for this product and it's not working. I want my money back. So he was entitled to all of that. And he was also entitled, through the courts, to legally impound the money that the father of the bride had given to his daughter. And in so doing, the thinking was he would be compensated for the loss of face, for the loss of for the embarrassment that he'd suffered because of her actions. And every single one of Joseph's friends would have counselled him to go after the money. And rightly so. Joseph, she did you wrong. Joseph, you worked 5 long, hard years to get ready for this marriage. You behaved properly, and she did this to you. Go for the money. Go for the money. Go for the money. And that's the only way that Joseph can regain respect in his community. That's the only way that Joseph can be a real man in his first century culture. But Matthew, presumably writing on information he'd gotten firsthand from Mary, presumably information that was conveyed with a great deal of pride, says that because Joseph was a good man, righteous man, he decided not to go through the courts and thereby forgo his right to any of the money. Now, why would he do this? Why take that view? His view probably is that Mary has gotten herself pregnant and her story is going to be that God did it. Okay. So henceforth, obviously, in a small community, she's going to be labelled as an immoral, mentally unstable woman. No one is going to marry her. No one's going to touch her. And in a male-dominated economy, her only options for survival are going to be begging or prostitution. And Joseph, angry though he is, hurt though he is, embarrassed though he is, nevertheless knows that this woman, whom he once loved, is going to have a difficult go of it, and she's going to need some money to get by. So in a very gentlemanly and in some ways foolish act, he chooses to leave the money where the money is and decides to start again on his own. And so I like Joseph. I hope you do too. He finds a way of restoring some of his personal honor by divorcing his wife, and yet he leaves his wife with more than her fair share of the money. This is a good man. He knows the difference, I think, between getting what he's due and doing the right thing. So that's his plan. Let her keep the money, I'll go and start again. Next sentence. But after he had considered this, that is, after he'd come up with this plan of divorcing her but letting her hang on to the cash, an angel of the Lord appeared to him in a dream, which in the Bible is never a good thing. In our culture, we have a positive view of angels. They're quite nice and fluffy, and they always say nice things. In the culture of the Bible, when an angel shows up, it's bad news for everyone. They're going to see scary things that disturb you. Similarly here, the angel says to him, "Joseph, son of David, do not be afraid to take Mary home as your wife, because what is conceived in her is from the Holy Spirit." Well, what do you know? She was telling the truth. Next sentence, skipping a few months. I suppose 9 exactly. I should know that. She will give birth to a son, and you are to give him the name Jesus. In our culture, we give our children names because we think they're cool. We spend time looking up these websites, children's names, and we do a fair bit of homework on it. In the first century, particularly first century Israel, people gave a child a name because they hoped that would say something about the character of the child. So if you wanted your child to be successful in business, you would give your child a name that meant successful in business. And if you wanted your child to be kind and gentle, you would give your child a name that meant kind and gentle. The name Jesus means in Hebrew, God will save, God will rescue. And Matthew explains this for the benefit of his non-Jewish audience. The angel says, give this child the name Jesus because he will grow up and save his people from their sins. As a first century Jew, Matthew's got a very clear idea about what he needs God for. Matthew needs God to get rid of the Romans. He needs God to get rid of all the things that stop him living a prosperous, happy, successful life. He needs God to restore that sense of national pride to Israel. But by the time Matthew writes his Jesus biography, his thinking and all that has changed. At this point, when he writes the text, he would have said, I need God to get a hold of my life because, you see, I'm a crooked businessman. I've made a lot of bad decisions. I've hurt an awful lot of people and done an awful lot of wrong things. And so what I need God for is to change me, to make me a better man. In our culture, we're kind of okay with baby Jesus. Baby Jesus is cute. Baby Jesus is the antithesis of threatening. And we kind of forget that in the Gospels, cute, unthreatening baby Jesus grows up into a very uncute, very threatening person who demands certain changes of us and who requires certain moralities of us and certain beliefs of us. And Joseph, I think, is the first person to be introduced to this threatening aspect of what Jesus would grow up to become. Joseph, you must change your view on certain things. You must change the plans that you've been working so hard on. So you must take Mary home as your wife and raise this child as your own, regardless of how inconvenient or embarrassing this is for you. Then in the next sentence we read that when Joseph woke up, he did what the angel of the Lord had commanded him and took Mary home as his wife. Now, everything that I said previously about Joseph's reputation in this small community is still true. He's still marrying a woman whom everyone in the village knows has gotten pregnant before she was married. I doubt the whole God bit ever became public knowledge, at least not during his lifetime. So people would have assumed either that Joseph himself had gotten her pregnant, which would have caused him embarrassment within his community, or they would have assumed that someone else had gotten her pregnant and that Joseph was somehow less of a man for putting up with it, which would have caused embarrassment within his community. One way or another, this construction worker lived his whole life with the shame of having Mary as his woman. When he walked down the road in later years with Jesus, he would have endured the knowing looks, the sarcastic whispers when he walked into Walmart, and he would have done so gladly, because in the New Testament he was one of the first men who took God at his word and just did what was asked of him. And he put that obedience far above his reputation in small town Israel. Notice also the fascinating information in verse 25. The sentence says, "But he had no union with her until she gave birth to a son, and he gave him the name Jesus." I say that's fascinating because although the Bible isn't as obsessed with the virginity of Mary as the church is, nonetheless it's interesting to read that having rushed through the whole wedding ceremony before the bump starts to show, and therefore having moved into the same house and having begun to sleep in the same bed, they managed to go a few months without doing the things that newly married couples do. And that would have been hard, I think, because they were poor. I think if you're rich, it's quite easy not to have sex, because now you really want me to explain that, don't you? Right? So, for example, if you're rich, you probably have a king-size bed, right? And king-size beds are probably quite bad for your sex life, because you can sleep very far apart. If you're rich, as we all are, you have a spare room in your house. And so if your partner is a snorer or something, it's quite easy. Or if you're not getting on, it's quite easy to just go and sleep in the guest's bedroom. However, in the cramped conditions of the ancient world, none of those things were possible. These people would have lived very cheek and jowl, and yet regardless of that, they have this strange arrangement for a newly married couple. I think because Joseph wants there to be no confusion in his own head as to whose child this is, and as to what his role and destiny will ultimately be. And so I admire Joseph a lot. I admire him because he responds to God simply. He responds to God simply. I think spirituality, and I use that word in its proper sense, living this filthy, beautiful, material life in a way that's open to God. I think spirituality in its proper sense is about saying yes to God in the ordinary moment. It's about being open to God in the ordinary moment, the moment of enjoying the coffee, of putting up with the idiot in the office, of handling the stress of the workplace, or the boredom of the mall, or the difficulties of the season. Being properly spiritual is about being open and willing and positive towards God in the ordinary moments of life. And I think, time for a question or two, but we forget too easily that all of life is a special moment. I was coming back from the cinema last night. The highway was closed because there was a really bad traffic accident, and someone's going to be not here for Christmas. And after church today, I've got to go to the funeral home and do a funeral. And we ignore the fact that one day the party will be over for us. One day we'll get a tap on the shoulder and say, that's it, you've got to go now. Everyone else can stay, but you've got to go. But that day isn't today. Today we're alive. And today we get the chance to enjoy all the moments of this filthy, brilliant, beautiful life that we live. And so today's a great day to not miss the opportunity to tell our children that we love them. Today's a great day to not miss the opportunity to tell our partner that we're glad that they are a partner and that we love them. Today's a great day not to be bitter. It's a great day to let go of the past. It's a great day to enjoy life and to squeeze every ounce of pleasure that we can out of this life. I've got some presents under my tree, as you do under yours, and I bought those presents as gifts for my children, and I want them to enjoy them. How much more so does God, our Father, want us to enjoy the gift of life that He gave us? And how unspiritual are we being by being miserable, being down on life all the time? Life is amazing. Every moment is amazing. Enjoy, 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 enjoy. Yes, I mean, good question. So I think as a pastor, if you came to me and you said, God spoke to me in a dream and told me to do this, I would be looking to introduce an awful lot of reason into that conversation. And I would perhaps be saying, maybe God isn't talking to you, maybe something else is going on in your life. In fact, I've had those conversations with people. Had a conversation with a girl in Rome a few years ago. God spoke to her every second of every day, and she ended up doing very wacky things because of what she thought God was telling to her. And it was quite a difficult conversation in which I had to tell her, maybe you're just slightly mental. Yeah, I mean, so, however, the Bible, things happen in the Bible that we don't expect to be normal today, but that's not how we should read the Bible. We shouldn't read the Bible as a book of reasonable facts that we can understand and explain. We should read the Bible as a story. And when you read the Bible as a story, you can then interact with a story and take the meaning from it that you're meant to take from it. To read the Bible as a book of science kind of spoils the Bible. It's a bit like going to an art gallery and looking at a gorgeous painting, and rather than trying to get the beauty of the painting, you go on about what the chemical composition of the paint is. Do you know what I mean? So yeah, we read these things in the Bible, and they're interesting, and they're weird, and they're slightly wacky. That's not the point. The point is to enjoy the story as a story, and not get too hung up on the odd details. So, can God speak to people in dreams today? Well, I wouldn't be for telling God what He can and can't do. Is it normal? Probably not. In my experience. No, I mean, no one's interested in Joseph. And I think it's a shame, because I think Joseph is the real hero of the story, right? I mean, all Mary did was get pregnant, right? And carried a child for 9 months, gave birth in a stable. Big deal. Joseph's the guy who's going to put up with this. And for a man in that kind of culture, to bear the loss of faith that he had to bear with, and to raise a child that's not his, and to cope with the disrespect, you know, in his culture. Joseph is a man who just does the right thing day after day after day, all his life, and that's really Christian. It's not in the spectacular, it's not in the grandiose, it's in just doing the right thing every single day and coping with the difficulties and making good choices every day. I like this man, but almost no one else is that interested in him. Great. Okay, we've got to go because there's a certain film from Middle Earth happening. God bless you. Have a very, very Merry Christmas with the people you love, and I'll see you next Sunday.